To start, I want to say that while this story isn't as conclusive or horrifying as some of the stories on this subreddit, it is something that still haunts me to this day, and I know that I will likely never get closure over it. My cousin will very likely never face the consequences for his actions, and I will very likely never speak to anyone about it aside from a few cases, and right now. Now, to provide some context, I am an autistic, transgender man who is currently in college, and at the time of these events, I was only around 5 or 6 years old, and at the time, still identified and presented as female. My cousin is around 7 to 10 years older than me. I'm not sure. I try to know as little about him as possible. I'm trying to move on and forget. During these events, my cousin was in high school while I was in elementary school. He was honestly trailer trash and smoked pot, and he often stayed with my grandma who lived across town from me. He was tall and skinny and looked kind of like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. His name is Austin, and his parents are actually very nice people who run a traveling carnival in California, which is where my mom's side of the family all live, including myself. Austin, unfortunately, took after my grandma and other Aunt Angel, who also smoked pot and was arrested multiple times for various reasons. Recently, she's been living with and stealing from my grandma, who has no job and is very sick. Back when the story happened, every Wednesday, my brother, my mom, and I would visit my grandma's house and spend the day there. The whole place reeked of smoke, a scent that to this day can trigger me into a meltdown, and the walls were stained yellow with nicotine. There was dog shit and urine stains everywhere, and if you stepped on a wet spot in the carpet, odds are it was a puddle of dog piss. The house was disgusting and felt almost haunted. In fact, one Thanksgiving, a few years after my grandfather died, Austin and a second cousin who I have long since forgotten the name of, and my older brother, took me out at night and convinced me the ghost of Poppy, my grandfather, was out to get us. I bought it, and we were outside for hours, them pushing me around and pranking me, and me being who I am, I fully believed every word they told me. They locked me outside for an hour, and I was crying and screaming, fully believing that Poppy was going to kill me for not crying at his funeral or something like that. Poppy was an alcoholic who made my mom's life hell when she was little. I didn't miss him, and nowadays I hardly remember him. My cousin was very physically and emotionally abusive to me. Why me specifically? I doubt I will ever know. He often shoved me around, pushed me into dirt, convinced me multiple times that I had eaten something poisonous and was going to die, shot airsoft guns at me, threw juice and fruit at me, and so on. Really, anything he could get away with. Kind of like how a child would torment a family pet. My brother was bearable most of the time, though he would occasionally bully me at the school we went to. It was only around Austin that he became abusive. Don't get me wrong, I was athletic and fast and could hold my own in a fight, but I never understood when I was supposed to be fighting back, and I never recognized when people were bullying or abusing me. Thanks, autism. So I just let it happen. Now, trigger warning. This part won't be graphic, but it will contain sexual assault. The worst thing he has ever done to me was when he took me into this big raised storehouse-type building in my grandma's yard. A well-worn place that was in extreme disrepair and partially sealed with a few nailed-down slabs of metal that Poppy had put in place years prior. It was dark and full of debris, and to get in, we had to squeeze through a tiny, rather sharp opening between two slabs of metal while using a moldy piece of wood to reach it. Austin was used to sneaking in there to smoke, I guess, so he made it in without a problem, but I was pretty scratched up from the sharp metal and from losing my balance on the wood multiple times. Austin told me about how he, my brother, and my other cousin Kayla had hidden a magical time capsule in the room, which he called a tree house, despite it definitely not being one. He told me the time capsule contained gold and other valuables, and things my little girl brain found cool at the time. He told me that we needed to retrieve it because the tree house was going to be demolished in a week, and in order to break the spell, we would have to do something little 5-year-old me apparently saw no flaw in. He wanted me to pull down my pants and touch our genitals together. I, of course, ate up every word. I was an overly friendly, gullible child, and while I didn't believe in Santa and the like, I fully believed in magic. I still do today, to a lesser extent. I believe anything is possible, and I have no proof that magic does or does not exist, but I digress. After a while of nervous hesitation, I followed his instructions, and I will not go into detail on what happened, but we were soon interrupted by my mother calling me as it was time for me to leave. My cousin appeared disappointed and annoyed, but at the time I figured he was just sad we couldn't break the spell on the time capsule. I went home that night feeling weird and disappointed that we hadn't been able to open it. I asked my brother about it, told him what Austin had told me, and he said he couldn't remember such a thing, and to stay away from Austin. I was annoyed he wouldn't help me, but nowadays I just feel betrayed. He never told an adult, and he clearly knew what was happening to me. If he wanted to, my brother could have stopped what came next, but he didn't. I guess I can't blame him. I was a very annoying child at the time, and it's possible he thought I was lying, or what I really don't like considering, maybe he hoped this would shut me up. I don't know, and I try my best not to care. The next week, the treehouse was still standing when I returned to my grandma's house. I was delighted to see Austin still visiting and the treehouse still in one piece. I thought I had another chance to unlock the time capsule, and I was determined to not miss it. Austin took me up to the treehouse, and this time I did not hesitate to do as he instructed. It's all very mortifying in retrospect, which is part of why I refuse to go into detail. I was an idiot and didn't understand, and that's all I'll say on the matter. Needless to say, despite my success, no time capsule magically appeared in the room. He pretended to be disappointed, and I was massively crushed. I thought for sure we could break the spell. I was such an idiot. I want to go back in time and punch my past self. Austin then told me that maybe we could try something else to break the spell. He told me that Kayla had essentially sucked him off in the treehouse. Something that now I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it were true, the both of them being redneck assholes who probably don't care about incest. He told me that it would tickle. I refused because that sounded gross, and surprisingly, he let me go. I guess he had no interest in full-on raping a child, something that I am forever grateful for. I went home that day feeling very sad over the failure, and as far as I know, my cousin never tried anything like that on me again. But I have no clue if he did or not, as there are many gaps in my memory, and I know what trauma can do to a person. The idea of him wanting to go further with me, his little cousin, makes me want to vomit. What if he had succeeded? What if he had convinced me to continue? I know if he had persisted, I likely would have given in, me being such a gullible fucking idiot. Obviously, I didn't understand what had happened at the time, but now that I'm older, I'm horrified and disgusted, and I know that some of my issues stem from this event. As I said before, even now I still get sent into a panic whenever I have to smell cigarette or marijuana smoke, and the thought of seeing my cousin again makes me feel sick and small. I haven't seen Austin in years. I am okay with this. The last time I saw him in person, I was in high school and had brought my girlfriend to my uncle's carnival for a date. He was manning the fun slide, and I avoided him like the plague. I pretended everything was fine, and I never spoke to him again. Austin has a baby now, a little boy named Nathan, who mostly lives with my Aunt Corinne, his grandma. We were at the laundromat recently, and Nathan video called my cousin and forced me to fake a smile to wave to his daddy, my old tormentor. I was mortified, and immediately after retreated to my seat, all energy for that day zapped from me. I don't speak of this much. I am traumatized and disgusted, and I have many emotional issues. Part of me wants to tell someone about this, to scream to the heavens that Austin is not innocent, to make him pay for abusing and sexually assaulting me, but I won't. I probably never will get closure for this, and my cousin will probably never face the consequences for his actions. I think the most horrifying part of this story is how common something like this is. A child who never speaks up, and an assailant who gets off scot-free. We will never know how many people have been tormented, how many people have been or are still tormentors, and they will probably never have to face what they have done. They will walk free. Oh, and that treehouse, it was never scheduled to be demolished. It's still standing to this day. I don't go near it. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was tired as hell. I had just finished having a 6-hour fight with my mom that ended in me throwing her against a wall after she tried hitting me in the face with a broom. "I'm calling your daddy, bitch," she said 5 seconds after her head hit the wall. That phrase meant that I would have to live with my dad, who she thought was more hellish than her. Although this was the first time any of our fights had gotten physical, and the first time I hit her back, that wasn't the first time she threatened to call my father. This seemed to be the pattern. She would go too far in one of her infamous tantrums. It would become too much for one person, me, to deal with. I would call my father, he would get me. After a few months of being happily away from her, she would call Child Protective Services and remind them that she still had full custody. Then, off again, I went to deal with her pill-induced rages. This happened more times than I care to admit. The few times the police were called and our living conditions were investigated, she would always get her way. In everyone's eyes, I was a disrespectful teenager who needed to learn his place in the world. In contrast, she was a single mother who was trying to do the best for her child. It didn't help that I was black either, and every police officer that my mom called treated me as such.
"Get your ass back in the house. You should be happy she's trying,"
the police officers would say. But she wasn't trying. She was unemployed and happily consumed the pills she couldn't sell. The police wouldn't even come inside the house. Every time they came, my mom made sure to meet them outside so they wouldn't see the filth that had taken over our home. Anyway, back to the story. After the fight, I tried to calm my nerves. I knew the next day would consist of more fights, more drama, and a ton of lectures from adults who had no idea what they were talking about. Not a minute after I laid down, I heard the voice that caused me time and time again to go out of character. My mother's voice. Echoes of exaggerated mm-hms and yeahs were being yelled from the next room. She was cackling and laughing with her equally annoying best friend, Reginald. From what I gathered, she said how she was going to walk into my room, throw a duffel bag at my head, and tell me to get the fuck out of her house. She had taken everything from me, but I refused to let her take my dignity and unpreparedly put me out on the street. I packed a bag as quietly as I could, tiptoed down the hallway, and silently unlocked the door to leave. I was off into the night. I didn't know the neighborhood all that well. This was our 5th apartment within the last 3 years, so after the 3rd one, I just stopped bothering to learn the routes altogether. I walked around aimlessly for about 4 blocks. I didn't care where I was going, as long as I got away from that apartment. I was using the time to think of what would happen the next day when, what seemed out of nowhere, a man popped up from down the sidewalk. I gave out an involuntary, "What the fuck?" and took a step back. I didn't know if he was trying to purposely scare me or if he was just a homeless person about to ask for money. He had a long beard, a bald spot I could see from a mile away, and a brown paper bag. I recovered myself. I couldn't afford to look scared in a neighborhood like this. I lowered my head and turned around to find another route, but tripped in the process, spilling all remnants out of my bag. I tried to gather all my stuff that fell, but the guy was getting antsy, coming closer and closer. I was only able to gather my iPad and a pair of underwear before I decided to fuck it and ran off as fast as I could. The street was dark and I felt my contacts falling out. You never know how truly cold the world is until you're caught without a jacket. I ran a full block before I had to catch my breath. I was tired, crying, furious, alone, and scared. I couldn't do this anymore. I decided to turn back and go home when the same man, who I thought I outran, started limping towards me. He looked tired too, but determined to catch me. "What the fuck do you want, old man?" I thought. I could see the sun starting to rise. I thought maybe if I just kept running, I would eventually find a police officer to help me get back home. But that was a useless idea. They would see a sweaty black teenager running down the street holding an iPad. What if they thought I stole it? What if they actually believed my story but put me in jail anyway for running away? In the middle of running for my life, I heard the most southern voice any man could have.
"You Renee's boy, right?"
I stopped dead in my tracks and turned my head around, making sure to keep my distance. Why does my mom have to know everyone in this town? I thought. "Yeah?" I said, trying to muster some kind of authority in my already shaking voice.
"Why are you out here?"
he said, slowly approaching me more and more. With every step he took forward, I made sure to take 2 steps back.
"She know you out here?"
I don't know why I responded. I don't know why I didn't just keep running. "Nah," I said, trying to match his accent and obvious illiteracy. He zipped down his fly and said,
"She ain't gotta know either."
Remember earlier when I said my mom sold pills? Well, a horrid epiphany crossed my mind. He wasn't one of my mom's friends. He was one of her customers. A grin started to spread across his face that still haunts me to this day. His eyes were a jaundiced yellow, almost cat-like. I've never seen eyes that looked so hungry.
You help me out, I help you out,
he said, still slowly approaching me. Get the fuck away from me! I yelled as loudly as I could. With what little energy I had, I turned away, preparing to run again. I hadn't even made it 3 feet before I heard sirens blaring from around the corner. The bearded man took off. After seeing him run, I had another terrible realization. He could have caught me at any time. Hell, he was a lot faster than I was. Who knows how long he was watching me before he popped up from around that corner. The police brought me back to my mom's house, completely ignoring my warning about the homeless pedophile. Most of my prediction came true. My mom was the one who called the police. The officer said they'd been looking for me for almost 4 hours. 30 more minutes and they would have had to issue an Amber Alert. I was sent away to live with my dad for 3 months. It was pretty chill and a lot more calming than I was used to. My mom got arrested shortly after. I still don't know what for, but my guess is she tried to cheat the wrong person out of their pills. I'm 20 years old now, and I still think about that homeless man's surreal grin and how far I would have got had it not been for those sirens.